Hello, come away in, as my mother used to say. Come in. I'm so glad that you could come and drop in on the study at the end of this this extraordinary Easter day, but we can have a quiet read together. I thought, having talked so much about the books, I'd mention journals. I mean, libraries, my little one included, have journals as well as books, and I get a few. Some of them here. I subscribe to Image. That's a fantastic journal of art, faith, and mystery. The Author, which is the sort of professional association of us humble, toiling scribes and book writers. Plough, that's an extraordinarily good thing. The Tablet. But I also get, here, it's a special Easter copy, which is actually lovely, a really beautiful cover, I think. I get the Church Times, that august journal, which has been going for well over a century, and I have the honour to be a contributor to it. I write a back page column called Poets' Corner, which has been, one set of which has been turned into a book, and a new book is going to come out in October. But I wanted on this Easter evening to read you something from that, whereby hangs a bit of a tale. So do come and sit down. I write this column, and Poets' Corner is usually quite a sort of whimsical, a light touch, literary, observing the peculiarities and beauties of the English countryside, and quite often its various inns. But obviously the situation we're in, and particularly the poignancy of our Easter celebrations outside of our churches and all of that, I felt that for the Easter one, I needed to write something a little bit more substantial. And also to bear witness to the way the poets of the past have helped me. Over here, this is my sort of working volume of John Donne, which used to belong to Muriel Bradbrook, the great Elizabethan scholar. In this column, I finish with a poem by John Donne called "Death Be Not Proud," which I'll read to you along with the column. Though there's another curious poetic element to this. Because of the way the publishing works, I have to finish my piece a week before it comes out, and this came out on Thursday. So I actually composed this piece I'm about to read you, although it's set for over the Easter weekend, about 10 days ago. And since I wrote this piece of prose, I've been reflecting on it further, and just in the last 2 days, I sort of felt that hiding shyly somewhere in the thicket of the prose was a poem waiting to come out. And I composed a poem which I'll also give you a link for, which those of you who may have already seen that poem will recognise had its sort of nascent beginnings in this. So let me read you this as a kind of Easter proclamation. Poets' Corner. April is proving a cruel month, but Easter brings us hope, is the way they've subtitled it. April has indeed become the cruelest month. Even as life blossoms in our gardens, death stalks our streets and hospitals. As Henry Scott Holland, Canon of St. Paul's, lamented a century ago in a passage from his sermon that nobody quotes, but how often death smites without discrimination, as if it had no law. It makes its horrible breach in our gladness with careless and inhuman disregard for us. It's the end of the Scott Holland quote. And now, we must fight on through grief, resisting an enemy that seems to have defeated our friends while the indifferent April sun shines on. And shall we keep Easter in spite of the grief, in spite of the churches locked and empty, in spite of packed hospitals, exhausted doctors and nurses, clergy and carers pushed past their limits? Yes, we shall keep Easter, and not in spite of these things, but because of them. For it was into the cruelest of Aprils that Christ came to find and save us. He came to take on death at its worst, to experience for us, with us, and in us that hideous combination of exposure and isolation, which was his cross. To know with us what it feels like to perish within reach and yet beyond the reach of the ones we love. But if he shares our Good Friday, and especially this dark one that we're all sharing now, it is so that we can share his Easter. On this strange Easter day, we will discover that he is not lost somewhere in our locked churches, any more than he was sealed in the sepulchre. He is up and out and risen long before us. He is as much at work in the world as the spring is at work in the blossoms. On this Easter day, the risen Christ, who might have been a wafer in the hands of the priest, will be strength in the hands of the nurse, a blessing in the hands of the carer. He goes with them to their work as surely as he comes to us in our church. Victory over this virus is some way off, but victory over death is already achieved. It was because he knew that in Christ death is swallowed up in victory that Canon Scott Holland was finally able to say in that sermon, "Death is nothing at all." Now, a dean of St. Paul's, who lived through just such times as ours, had said that before with even greater power. John Donne saw more than his fair share of poison, war and sickness, but he could still fling this great defiance into the face of death. It's Christ's defiance. It's Christ's defiance, and this Easter it is ours. So done. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure. Then from thee much more must flow, and soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls' delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and us with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swell'st thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So I end with done there. I'll give you a link to this full article in the Church Times, and also a link to the poem that sometime after I'd written it I drew gently from the thicket of the prose. Thanks for dropping in.